Hello everyone. This is Six Path Weeb, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're diving into an exciting topic: what if Naruko's scroll training gave her the edge? Part 3. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer: the content here is purely for entertainment and discussion purposes. I do not own any of the anime footage used in my videos. All rights and credits go to their respective creators and copyright holders. Now, let's jump right into it, guys. Just a little more, mumbled the woman as she tightened her grip around Naruko's neck. No, Naruko gasped. The woman looked at Naruko with confusion, knowing she was still alive for the moment, but unable to understand how she could still speak as she applied pressure to her windpipe. I will not. Naruko breathed out, though her voice was strained. Now the woman was seriously wondering how Naruko was managing to speak without any part of her throat intact. Give up, Naruko shouted as she brought one of her hands up to defend herself, quickly sending her other hand toward the woman's throat. With a swift motion, Naruko focused her chakra, infusing it with wind, and struck. The sound of wind slicing through the air was heard as Naruko's hand made contact with the woman's throat, a burst of wind chakra enhancing the force. Naruko stumbled back as she was freed from the woman's grip. She felt a surge of energy coursing through her body, merging with her chakra and making it feel more potent and controlled. Her strength and speed seemed to triple, but there was also something else, a strange new energy flowing within her. Naruko glanced back at the spot where she thought the woman had fallen, her eyes widening in disbelief. The woman was standing there as though nothing had happened to her, no signs of injury visible. Naruko took a few cautious steps back as the woman started walking toward her. Well, the woman said, smiling, it seems my essence has bonded with you. That means I can't kill you. But perhaps I can make you my servant. Naruko glared defiantly. There was no way she would ever become anyone's servant. Naruko instinctively called upon the new energy coursing through her, and to her surprise, a large metallic scythe materialized in her hands. The woman blinked in surprise before her expression turned into a victorious grin. Oh. So my essence has transformed you into a reaper? This changes things. Only if you manage to survive this, the woman said before dashing at Naruko with a tanto appearing in her hand. Naruko had no experience fighting with a scythe, having only received basic sword training from Tobirama, but she knew she had to act quickly. She blocked the woman's overhead slash with the scythe, but she felt her energy draining. Without thinking, Naruko adjusted her stance, making the scythe tilt and unbalance her opponent. She then spun around and struck, cleaving the woman in two at the waist. Naruko jumped back, watching as the woman reformed herself once again. Naruko blinked, unsure of what to make of the situation as the woman smirked and vanished. The next thing Naruko knew, she was back in the clearing where she and Jiraiya had been camping. Jiraiya stood up, stretching and grinning. Well, Naruko, we had a good sleep, so let's get moving. The next town has a few gambling dens, so Tsunade might be there. Naruko nodded, still thinking about the strange white-haired woman and her eerie devil-like eyes. In town. Jiraiya sighed as he heard about a massive snake attacking a castle near the town. Eyewitnesses mentioned seeing a pale man and a blonde woman causing the destruction. Jiraiya grinned, he knew exactly who was behind it. As they walked through the town, Jiraiya looked over at Naruko, who had become quite the ally after their previous training. Hey, Naruko, wanna grab a bite to eat? Jiraiya asked. Naruko smirked. Sure, Uro-sennin. You know that you joined in on my peeping, right? That makes you an Urogaki too, Jiraiya teased, thinking he had one-upped her. Naruko grinned back at him. Who would they believe, Jiraiya? A pervert like you, or an innocent like me? Jiraiya sputtered. She had him there. He would be the one to take the blame if anyone found out about their antics. They continued on, entering a restaurant where Naruko placed her order. As they waited, Jiraiya's attention was drawn to a woman sitting at a booth nearby. Naruko's eyes locked on her too. Tsunade. Sitting with her assistant, Shizune. Yo. Tsunade. Jiraiya called as he walked over. Naruko felt an urge to glance to the side. There she was again, the woman who had nearly taken her life. Dressed in a white kimono with prayer beads wrapped around her wrist, and wooden sandals, the woman sat there with a smug grin. Naruko turned her attention back to the booth, noticing a note placed on the table. Picking it up, Naruko began to read. Naruko Uzumaki, you are unlike the others. I have never encountered anyone who could turn my essence into their own. It's fascinating. Meet me outside at midnight, and we shall battle. Win, and you will receive a reward. Lose, and I will take your soul. Enjoy the time you have left, for I will not hold back. Dash. Naruko dropped the letter, shaking her head. The woman had been holding back, giving her a chance to survive by sheer luck. Just then, Tsunade's voice cut through the air. The Hokage were fools. Naruko's expression darkened as she slowly walked toward Tsunade, the words hanging heavily in the air. What did you say about the Hokage? Naruko asked, her voice cold. Tsunade repeated her statement. The Hokage were fools. Just like you, Naruko responded, her tone hard as stone. Two things happened when Naruko said that. The first was Jiraiya attempting to stop Naruko from grabbing Tsunade, the second was Tsunade being sent through the wall from Naruko's forceful throw. Naruko turned her head toward Jiraiya for a moment and spoke words that made him stop in his tracks. I won't allow anyone to disrespect my father and great-grandparents, Naruko said before leaping after Tsunade outside. Tsunade didn't see it coming. All she saw was the wall, followed by a sharp pain that shot through her side. Standing up and healing herself, she waited for Naruko to appear. Tsunade clenched her teeth together, thinking to herself that this young one would be taught a lesson. I honestly don't understand why Hokage Gigi wants you to become Hokage. All I see is a woman who can't cope with her grief, Naruko said, locking eyes with Tsunade. Tsunade's amber eyes hardened at Naruko's words. How dare this child suggest that her pain was so insignificant? She had no idea what real pain was. With a growl, Tsunade dashed toward Naruko, who calmly observed as she closed the distance. For Naruko, this was the perfect demonstration of why it was essential to train. Tsunade was moving at a mid-jonin speed, but she was completely unaware of her surroundings, missing the seal that had activated when she passed it. Zap! Ahhh! Tsunade screamed as she collapsed to the floor, clutching her ankle that had been burned by the electric shock. Tsunade's face twisted in pain, her tears falling as she gazed at her injured ankle. She looked up at Naruko, expecting to see one of three reactions. The first was concern for injuring the great slug princess. The second was an arrogant smile for defeating a Sannin. Or, perhaps, fear that she might seek the former Hokage's assistance to have this young one removed from the village. But instead, all she saw was disappointment. Naruko's expression was one of quiet disapproval. I can't believe we're related, Naruko murmured to herself as she turned and walked away toward the forest, needing to prepare for the silver-haired woman that night. Tsunade watched her leave, standing silently for a moment before looking down at the ground. Slowly, she rose to her feet. Shizune and Jiraiya followed her into her room, where Tsunade locked the door behind them and turned to glare at Jiraiya. Who is she? Tsunade asked, her voice low and filled with both curiosity and concern. Ha! 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 What is this? Panted Naruko as she held the left side of her ribs, struggling to catch her breath while she glanced at the woman standing before her. The woman had pale skin and silvery hair that reached her mid-back. Her eyes shifted between various colors, red, black, and gold, changing at will, with each color having a unique, slit-like pupil. She wore a white kimono adorned with black ravens in flight, and a black belt secured it at her waist. Her footwear was black shinobi sandals, and in her hand, she held a tanto, the same weapon she had been using throughout their battle. Naruko had no idea how long the fight had been going on, but she was certain of one thing: they were no longer in the land of the living, as the woman had described it. When Naruko had stepped outside the bar to confront the woman, she felt something grip her ankle and pull her into the ground. She looked down to see a black portal before everything went dark. When she woke up, the woman stood before her. I'm just a very special woman, the woman grinned, her face showing little sign of damage from the fight. Naruko sighed, then dropped her scythe, which dissolved into dark smoke and disappeared. She couldn't keep up with the woman, but she was determined to keep trying. With resolve, Naruko focused her gaze on the woman and charged. Suddenly, a spiraling sound filled the air, and in Naruko's palm, a sphere of energy began to form, the technique her father had created, the Rasengan. I never thought I'd use this technique until I perfected it, Naruko said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. But I won't give up. I can't afford to lose, not when I have people who believe in me, she declared, gathering wind chakra into the spiraling sphere, causing it to grow in size. The woman raised an eyebrow, surprised by the technique forming in Naruko's hand. She had seen many versions of the Rasengan in her time, especially during the so-called Third Shinobi War, but this one was unlike any she had encountered. It felt much stronger than the typical Rasengan. Naruko watched the woman carefully as the Rasengan continued to expand. She had never tested the technique before, but now seemed as good a time as any. Naruko raised the technique above her head, feeling the wind it produced push her hair and clothes backward. "I'm sorry if this ends up being too much for you. But I can't break my promise," Naruko said, her voice firm. "I'll fight to the very end," she continued, before sprinting toward the woman. The woman was momentarily stunned. Naruko was getting closer, faster with each step, and yet, she was apologizing for what might happen. "This one is certainly interesting," she thought, not expecting the next move. Wind release, Rasen Shuriken. The woman watched as the spiraling shuriken flew toward her, moving faster than Naruko herself was running. She felt the technique tear through the air with immense power. Naruko collapsed to one knee, drained from using such a powerful attack. I'm out of chakra," she murmured, struggling to stay conscious. "I need to get out of here," she whispered before falling forward, her face touching the cold floor. The woman observed her with curiosity. "How interesting. I will certainly keep an eye on you." "And much more," she mused, her silver hair shimmering in the dark. With a snap of her fingers, the woman's presence seemed to fade, and Naruko's body vanished, returning to the living world. Several days later. "I don't want to study, Tobirama-sensei." "Ah. Not the water whips." Naruko yelped, flipping through the air, landing with a thud. She groaned, sitting up and brushing the dirt off her newly cleaned tuning jacket. Where am I? How did I get out of that dark arena?" she muttered to herself as she glanced around. Naruko took a moment to focus, then gasped in shock. Without a second thought, she sprinted toward where her companions, Jiraiya and Tsunade, were located. She could feel Shizune's chakra presence as well, nearby. Castle clearing. Jiraiya stood puzzled, reflecting on the strange chain of events. He and Tsunade had gone out for a drink the previous night, only for him to wake up drugged and confused. When Shizune rushed in, explaining Orochimaru's plan to resurrect Dan and Nawaki, Jiraiya had tried to locate Naruko, but she was nowhere to be found. After confronting Orochimaru, he was shocked to find the situation growing more dire, Orochimaru's arms still in their purple form, Kabuto by his side, and Tsunade struggling to hold her own against them both. Jiraiya had been watching Tsunade unleash blow after blow, but it was clear she was overwhelmed. With a surge of chakra, he jumped into the fray alongside Shizune. Forest. Naruko trudged through the forest, holding her side as pain coursed through her body from the earlier battle. She knew she was running out of energy, but she couldn't stop now. Suddenly, multiple chakra signatures appeared out of nowhere. Not good. If I can sense them from this distance, their chakra must be as powerful as mine or even stronger, Naruko thought, wincing as she grabbed her side and sprinted toward the sources. Back at the castle clearing. Naruko arrived just in time to witness the chaos. Orochimaru and Kabuto were battling Jiraiya and Tsunade, both using their summoning animals to fight. Shizune was healing Jiraiya while engaging in the battle as well. But Naruko's attention was drawn to something more concerning. Orochimaru's summon was a massive snake, far too powerful for both the Toad boss and the Slug boss. Taking a deep breath, Naruko felt the weight of the battle ahead. She knew this fight would push her to her limits. Looking at her hand, she exhaled. "I need to end this quickly." With a leap, she headed towards Jiraiya, ready to assist him. Summoning jutsu. Naruko called, her voice echoing through the air. A raven appeared with a loud kya. As it swooped down and landed beneath Naruko. Jiraiya blinked in surprise, while Tsunade looked on with shock. Orochimaru's face paled at the sight, recognizing Naruko as a formidable opponent. Kabuto wasn't as worried. He had seen Naruko's abilities before and knew the battle wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't about to back down. The raven surveyed the area, then looked toward Naruko. "Why have you summoned me, Naruko-chan? Shouldn't you have summoned another creature?" Naruko nodded. "I couldn't summon anyone else. Hawk is good, but you're faster and more agile. Plus, your shadow release abilities and soul manipulation will be key." The raven nodded in understanding. "Very well, who do we face?" "The snake," Naruko replied, her tone sharp and determined. Orochimaru cursed under his breath. He had to act fast, or this battle could turn against him. "Kabuto. Reverse summon, now." He barked. But before he could react, Naruko's raven swooped in, and the ground shook with a powerful strike. Orochimaru and Kabuto turned towards the poof and their eyes widened in surprise. Before them stood Naruko's raven, holding Manda's eye in its beak, nibbling at it as it stared at them. Orochimaru glanced at Kabuto with a look of urgency. This was not the right moment to engage in battle. Now Orochimaru was cut off when a knee slammed into his face. You know that I won't let you leave unscathed, right? Dadabayo, Naruko said, standing confidently in front of Orochimaru's prone body. Clap, clap, clap. Kabuto walked toward Naruko and Orochimaru, his bruise from being hit by Orochimaru healing before Naruko's eyes. Kabuto's healing rate was certainly impressive. But not impressive enough, Naruko thought to herself. Naruko tilted her head as she examined both Orochimaru and Kabuto for a moment, before an idea popped into her mind, causing Kabuto to flinch in surprise. Oh, I see now. So you're Orochimaru's partner? Naruko asked curiously, her expression playful. The moment she asked, Kabuto shot her a sharp glare. Naruko gave Kabuto a mischievous grin. So, I guess that's a yes? She teased, watching as Kabuto glared back at her and sent some killing intent her way. At least I'm not a dead last, Kabuto said, inching slightly closer to Orochimaru as he prepared to use an escape technique. Naruko raised an eyebrow. It was only thanks to her cage-level training that she knew rank didn't define someone's strength. After all, if Hashirama could defeat her father at the age of 15 in a full-scale fight without his Makuten, there were no limits to what one could achieve with dedication and hard work. However, Naruko winced and fell to one knee, clutching her rib which she had just felt crack from exerting too much chakra earlier. Kabuto saw this as his opportunity and quickly dashed over to Orochimaru before vanishing from sight. Just then, Jiraiya and Tsunade, along with Shizune and a pig, appeared. Jiraiya quickly went to Naruko's side, noticing that she was cradling her ribs. Kid, you alright? Did Orochimaru hurt you? Jiraiya asked, only to be met with a shake of Naruko's head. No. I've had this injury from training a couple of hours ago, Naruko grimaced, the healing process slow as her chakra was running low. Poof. A sudden surge of chakra returned to her. Naruko mentally thanked her Raven summon as it returned home and replenished her chakra reserves. Tsunade watched as Naruko stood up and began healing her broken ribs. It was unlike anything Tsunade had seen before, except when she had once healed Kushina in her youth. Though she remembered something about Kyuubi being less than kind and taking years to manifest after Kushina's death, Tsunade couldn't recall the full details. Naruko stretched her arms and legs experimentally, making sure they were fine. Turning to Tsunade, she asked with a serious expression, So, do you agree to become Hokage? Tsunade stared at the spot where Orochimaru had fallen moments ago, deep in thought. Jiraiya had filled her in on Orochimaru's plan to revive people using Edo Tensei, and even she didn't want to see her loved ones brought back in that form. She then turned to Naruko, who had not only injured Orochimaru but had also forced him to flee with his snake summon. Tsunade exchanged a glance with Shizune, who nodded in understanding. Feeling her resistance break, Tsunade took a deep breath and nodded resolutely. Yes. I will become the 5th Hokage, Tsunade declared, raising her fist triumphantly. Naruko nodded, then went down to one knee and placed her Fox Anbu mask on. Nice to meet you, Hokage-sama. My name is Naruko Uzumaki. Public rank, Chunin, secret rank, Anbu recruit, Naruko said respectfully, waiting for Tsunade to recover from the shock of hearing that she was an Anbu. Naruko realized she had forgotten to mention this to Jiraiya earlier. WW what? Since when were you an Anbu? Jiraiya exclaimed, only for Naruko to quickly cover his mouth with her hand. You don't tell people I'm an Anbu, Dadabayo, Naruko said firmly, eyeing Jiraiya. He nodded, calming down. But you are going to tell me what you mean by special rank, Jiraiya insisted, his curiosity piqued. Naruko sighed before nodding. Fine, she said, preparing to explain further. Forest. Naruko darted through the trees, the forest blurring around her as she moved at high speed. It had been several weeks since Tsunade's inauguration as the 5th Hokage, and Naruko was finally being assigned to Anbu missions. She had moved between various Anbu units, and though she had heard rumors about the Nico team's captain, she could honestly say that the Nico team was the best. However, there were whispers that the Nico Anbu captain often pushed herself too hard during missions, to the point of risking her well-being. Naruko was puzzled by these rumors until she asked one of her teammates, Mai, about it. Mai explained that the captain had been deeply affected by the death of a Jonin named Hayate, who passed away between the 2nd and 3rd Chunin exam phases. Naruko's memory was jogged when she learned that Hayate had been a sickly jonin who had always coughed a lot and had brown hair. Naruko realized that he was the same jonin who had protected the competitors during the preliminary rounds of the Chunin exams. Determined to help, Naruko took small actions to show support for her captain. She learned that the Nico captain was barely eating, surviving only on nutritional bars made for emergencies, which provided very little nourishment. In an effort to help, Naruko filled the captain's apartment with fresh, stored food that would last, thanks to seals Naruko placed on it to keep it preserved. When the Nico captain came home, her face lit up with shock and a hint of happiness at the gesture. While working under the Nico captain, Naruko still hadn't learned her name. This frustrated Naruko because she was accustomed to knowing the names of all Onbu members. She resolved to learn it soon. As Naruko and her team moved through the trees, she noticed the approaching storm ninjas from the Hidden Cloud Village, a special forces group similar to Onbu. She quickly assessed her team's injuries. Mai was bleeding heavily from her arm, Tiger had both arms broken in the ambush, and Nico had sustained the most severe injuries but was still pressing on. Naruko herself had been injured protecting Nico, but her wounds had already healed. Naruko knew that their team would be pursued even beyond the Fire Nation's borders. As the situation grew dire, Naruko made a decision to protect her team at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing herself. With determination, Naruko leapt to the next branch, channeled her chakra, and vanished in the blink of an eye. Her speed was so great that the storm ninjas had no idea what hit them. The Nico team watched in awe as Naruko moved faster than they could process. Within moments, the entire enemy squad was incapacitated. Naruko, barely able to catch her breath, gave her team a thumbs up before passing out. Nico was left frozen, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. When she tried to lift Naruko's unconscious body, the sudden movement triggered an unexpected change in her own body. Her shattered elbow miraculously healed, as if Naruko's blood had activated some kind of healing ability. Naruko, still in a daze, was amazed to discover that her blood seemed to possess healing properties. It was something she had never expected but could now use to heal others. Nico's shoulder was also quickly healed as Naruko's blood worked its magic. Naruko, still somewhat stunned, smiled at Nico before passing out again. As the team moved quickly to escape, Naruko muttered about an incoming sonic boom, warning her teammates of the impending danger. Nico, understanding the urgency, quickly used Naruko's blood to heal herself and her teammates. They continued their journey back to Konoha, aware that they needed to hurry before the blast from the sonic boom reached them. After several hours of running, the team finally reached the gates of Konoha. Naruko, still recovering, found herself carried by Nico, who had grown tired from the long journey. Naruko, ever upbeat, reassured Nico that they would handle the paperwork later and used her Shunshine to teleport to the Hokage's office to report the mission. Back at Onbu headquarters, Nico was reminded of the grief she still carried from the loss of Hayate, but she pushed forward, knowing that her team needed her strength. After changing out of her Onbu gear, Nico returned home, only to be startled by a surprise waiting for her inside. The Nico Onbu was shocked, she had no idea that this would happen. One of the people who jumped up had been with her just a few minutes ago. There stood her friends and teammates, Anko Mitarashi, Kurenai Yuhi, Hana Inuzuka, and Naruko Uzumaki. She did the first thing that popped into her head, throw the nearest thing at Naruko, as she was only a teammate. That thing she threw was a book. A 900-page book. Thud. The four women watched as Naruko lay on the floor, twitching her leg every few moments. It was complete silence. Ha 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 ha. For a few seconds. Anko couldn't hold back from laughing at the image of Naruko on the floor with a heavy book on her face. Soon, the rest of the women joined in, laughing at Naruko. Naruko slowly pried the book off her face and looked at the cover. She then began twitching her eyebrow. The book's title was How to Dodge for Jinan. That hurt Naruko's pride very much. Naruko turned towards the four laughing women, who were now on the floor, and raised a finger at them. Anko started to stop laughing, but one look at Naruko made her crack up again. Naruko was now a twitching mess. Her eyebrows were twitching at an insane rate, and she started to chuckle, a very mischievous chuckle. Keep laughing. Because after today, the prankster from hell will strike you all, muttered Naruko as she gave off a playful grin, which made the other women stop and shake in slight concern. However, Naruko quickly dropped her mischievous smile and gave a small, friendly grin. Well now, are we going to hold your party, Miss Nico? Asked Naruko, watching the girls stand up in agreement. The Nico Onbu had no idea how this happened but wasn't going to complain. There was, however, one thing that bothered her. Naruko. What about the Anbu report you said you would hand in? You didn't lie, did you? Asked the woman, narrowing her eyes, which made the other women glare at her too. Naruko looked at her captain like she was asking an obvious question and muttered 2 words. Cage. Bunshine, said Naruko, which instantly made her captain calm down. Naruko then decided to give her captain a present, though she knew it might be a bit risky if certain people found out about her new ability. Well, Captain, since I don't know you that well, I wanted to give you a present and a party. Here's my present, though it will only last for 24 hours, okay? Naruko said, watching as her captain nodded. She slowly moved her hands together as if in prayer. The women there watched as Naruko was surrounded by black energy, and it terrified them. It felt like something very ominous. Slowly, Naruko moved her hands in front of her and created a portal. This was something she had learned during her battle with the Death Goddess a few days ago. She didn't know why, but the goddess had attacked her at random times and always displayed a new technique, which Naruko tried to replicate. This particular technique was given to her by the goddess after Naruko had defeated her for the 30th time. The technique allowed the user to summon a soul to battle with them, but to do so, the user needed a higher amount of spiritual energy. Since chakra was made from both spiritual and physical energy, only certain ninja could summon higher tier spirits. However, the more people summoned, the more their energy drained the user, leaving them fatigued faster. Another drawback was that once summoned, if anyone was absorbed into the Shinigami's realm, they couldn't be summoned again. Naruko focused on the portal, and soon she sensed Hayate's signature within it. She extended her energy and slowly pulled him from the land of the dead, watching as his body started to materialize in the living world. The Nico Anbu and the rest of the women watched in awe as a ghostly replica of Hayate appeared, before slowly gaining skin and clothing. Soon, the replica of Hayate formed completely and fell to the ground as if lifeless. Until his body groaned. Naruko watched as her captain was shocked at the slowly rising form of her former lover. Naruko closed the portal, absorbed her dark energy, and turned to her captain. There you go, Captain Nico. The revived Hayate, for 24 hours. Also, have a great birthday, Naruko said, then disappeared with a sunshine. The Nico Anbu watched as her lover stood still for a moment before jumping towards her and giving her a warm hug. Yu Gao. It's nice to see you again, whispered Hayate into Yu Gao's ear. Yu Gao wrapped her arms around Hayate in return, enjoying the hug, not even minding that he had just been revived in front of her. Anko, Kurenai, and Hana just stood there, in complete shock, watching the two lovers reunited since the Chunin exams. Anko slowly turned her head towards her friends and asked the question on all their minds. Did you see that too? Naruko's apartment. Naruko looked around her apartment and sighed. She was still in her Anbu garb and couldn't be bothered going to headquarters to store her things. After all, what difference did it make if they found out she was the Fox Anbu? She was a Jinchuriki anyway, so what was the point? Slowly, she took off her Anbu armor and placed it on her bed, then walked to the kitchen to prepare some stir-fry for herself. She smiled as the rice, chopped vegetables, and soy sauce mixed together, filling the air with an incredible aroma. Sure, ramen was delicious, but even ramen couldn't smell this good. Unless it was from Ichiraku Ramen. That place was on another level. So, what are you making? Asked a voice behind Naruko. Naruko immediately stiffened, ready for a confrontation. But when she turned around, her mouth dropped open in shock. There, sitting at her table, was the Shinigami, still in her usual attire, a tight white shirt and white pants. Her crimson eyes glinted as she grinned. Naruko was frozen in shock as the Shinigami enjoyed every second of it. Naruko tried to form words but found herself at a loss. The Shinigami slowly stood, walked around the table, and gently raised Naruko's chin. Then, she leaned in closer, her lips a mere breath away from Naruko's. Naruko tried to move, but her body refused. Then their lips met. For a moment, Naruko felt a rush of warmth and comfort, as if she had stepped into a world of peace. The Shinigami had intended to poison Naruko, but instead, she felt a surprising sense of pleasure from the kiss. She pulled back slightly, surprised by how good it felt. Naruko wrapped her arms around the Shinigami's back, pulling her closer, and the two shared a tender moment before Naruko reluctantly pulled away for air. The Shinigami grinned mischievously as she sat down at the table. A plate appeared in front of her, and Naruko, relieved that her food was still intact, grabbed a bowl to serve the stir-fry. They sat down and ate in silence, both enjoying the meal, though Naruko occasionally glanced at the Shinigami with curiosity. How do you even talk to someone who could end your life in an instant? The Shinigami, on her 5th serving, seemed pleased with the meal, though she didn't need to eat. She wasn't quite full. Naruko noticed she was almost finished with her 2nd serving when the Shinigami suddenly asked for water. Of course, Naruko said, walking to the fridge. As she filled a glass with water, she felt the Shinigami's arms wrap around her, resting her head on Naruko's shoulder. Thank you for the lunch, Naruko. Just for that, I'm changing the way I'm treating you. The Shinigami murmured into Naruko's ear. Naruko, confused but intrigued, turned slightly and found herself in another kiss with the Shinigami. Naruko quickly wiped her lips and glanced at her long black sleeve shirt, noticing a green mark slashed across her arm. She turned her gaze back to the Shinigami and sprinted out of her apartment, leaping onto the roof of a building across the street. Naruko jumped as far and as fast as she could, but being a mere mortal reaper, she knew her speed couldn't outpace a Shinigami. Before long, the Shinigami appeared next to her, running in parallel. The Shinigami chuckled, which only spurred Naruko to run faster, desperate to escape. She didn't understand why, but she had the feeling that if she were caught, it wouldn't end well. Still, she suspected that the kiss the Shinigami had given her was only a weaker version of the true one. But once again, the Shinigami caught up, grabbing her and halting her progress. Now, calm down, Naruko. I'll take my time with you, the Shinigami said, her pink lips turning a darker shade of green. Naruko's determination flared. She refused to be anyone's captive. Focusing her chakra, she sent a wave through her skin, causing the Shinigami to pass right through her as she moved forward. With a burst of yellow, Naruko disappeared, until the Shinigami caught her fist from her right side. The Shinigami grinned as Naruko's face showed shock. She had traveled at a speed that should have been impossible to stop. Crack! A swift knee to her stomach brought Naruko to her knees, her fist still gripped tightly in the Shinigami's hand. The Shinigami smiled even wider before letting Naruko's hand drop to the ground. With a flick of her wrist, she created a portal and began to walk toward it, glancing back at Naruko one last time and winking before vanishing into the black abyss. Naruko lay there, her ribs healing slowly, watching as the dark portal collapsed in on itself. After a moment, she stood and limped down toward the street below. It wasn't until she landed that she realized something important. She was still wearing an Onbu uniform, and her Onbu tattoo was visible, her long sleeve shirt having torn while she was running. To her dismay, Teams 7, 8, 9, and 10 were all standing nearby without their senseis, staring at her in shock as she clutched her ribs. Naruko noticed the stunned expressions on her fellow Genans' faces, especially when they saw her garb and the tattoo. She scratched the back of her head awkwardly. So, cool costume, right? She asked with a nervous grin. However, before Sakura and Ino could open their mouths, Naruko quickly used her flash step and sealed their mouths shut with tape. The others were still staring in disbelief, except for Sasuke, whose face twisted in frustration as his eyes narrowed on Naruko's shoulder tattoo. Suddenly, Naruko's attention was caught by a hawk flying overhead. She raised her arm to shield her face as it landed on her, delivering a scroll. After giving the hawk a small piece of apple from her wrist seal, the bird chirped happily and flew off toward the Hokage tower. Ignoring her friend's confusion, Naruko unrolled the scroll and began reading. Tsunade had been working her hard with countless missions over the past few weeks, either testing her abilities or trying to make her quit Onbu, as Naruko had become one of her last surviving family members. Tsunade had discovered it through a strange, cryptic moment involving photographs, but that story was a mystery for another time. Naruko had made significant progress with her chakra control, and thanks to her Makuten abilities, which she hadn't yet revealed to Tsunade, she would soon master perfect control. As she read further, she saw that Tsunade had given her an option: join Onbu Unit Delta on a mission, or train for her upcoming journey with Jiraiya. Choosing to focus on her training, Naruko quickly summoned a crow and sent the scroll back with her response. Afterward, she headed to a nearby barbecue restaurant. Using a special seal to change her clothes from her Onbu attire to civilian gear, she opted for a simple three-quarter shirt with the Uzumaki spiral on the hem and black pants with bandages wrapped around the hems. Naruko settled in for a meal of teriyaki chicken. It had been a tough day, and her healing ribs were making her hungry. As Naruko entered the restaurant, she forgot that her old teammates were still standing in shock at her appearance. Kurenai had realized why Naruko wore Onbu attire when helping set up Yugao's party but was curious as to why she wore it afterward. Taking a seat, Kurenai and her team walked over and sat with Naruko. Naruko was surprised but didn't mind and continued eating her meal. Soon, the other teams, 7, 9, and 10, followed suit, filling the table. For a few minutes, everyone quietly placed their orders. When a waitress approached with Naruko's extra teriyaki order, Kakashi broke the silence. "So, Naruko," Kakashi began, "why have you been avoiding team training? If you don't train, you won't improve, you know?" Naruko tilted her head slightly and responded, "Kakashi. You know I was promoted to Chunin, right? And you saw my Anbu tattoo. I'm not on Team 7 anymore. Didn't you know that?" Kakashi blinked, taken aback by her response. Sasuke, unable to believe his ears, clenched his jaw. The dead last had become a Chunin? Sakura, however, couldn't keep her feelings in. "Naruko baka. Stop lying. If you were Chunin, that means we should all be Jonin by now. And whose Anbu clothes did you steal? Trying to look cool?" she yelled. Naruko shrugged. "I was promoted during the Chunin exams, and Jiji, when he was Hokage, gave me a dual promotion. Chunin and special Anbu. I did both for a while, but once I leave Anbu, I can be promoted to Jonin. On paper, I'm still Chunin, though." The adults at the table were shocked. The dead last Naruko was both an unofficial Anbu member and an official Chunin. It was incredible. Just then, Jiraiya appeared out of nowhere, grinning. "It's good to see you bought me lunch. Good student," he teased, sitting beside Naruko. Tsunade arrived soon after, taking a seat next to Naruko and pinching her cheek. "What did I hear about you creating a book?" she asked, glancing at Jiraiya, who was still grinning. Naruko grinned back and pulled out her book, The Goddess's Playmate. When Tsunade saw it, she immediately released Naruko's cheek, pulling out her own copy. If Naruko had written this book, Tsunade was going to make her personal writer. After all, the plot of a mortal trying to defy a goddess who wanted him for herself was brilliant. Before long, Naruko was surrounded by women asking her to sign their copies of the book. She gave a goofy grin and signed each one, much to Jiraiya's amusement. As the event continued, Naruko returned to eating her meal, and the atmosphere returned to normal. It was one of the rare times her secret as the book's author had been exposed. After a while, Shizune came in to drag Tsunade away, clutching her copy of Naruko's book. Naruko took a moment to nod to Jiraiya before he and Naruko disappeared in a flash of light, leaving the others to ponder the mystery of Naruko's sudden rise. Sasuke, enraged, stormed off, followed by Ino and Sakura. Kiba followed too, fuming at how far ahead Naruko had gotten, with Hinata and Shino trying to calm him down. Lee, inspired to improve himself, followed with Neji and Tenten. The remaining Jonin, Asuma, Shikamaru, and Choji, stayed behind. Asuma grinned, ordered more food, and pulled out a shogi board to play with Shikamaru. It had been a good day. "Ha, ha, ha." Thud. "Weak," said Naruko as she turned around from her last opponent in a Chunin bandit camp near the border of the Land of Fire. Naruko sighed. It had been a few weeks since she had been banished from her home, but she was more or less disappointed at how she ended up being banished. Moving toward a stone to sit on, Naruko raised her right hand up toward her face and slowly removed her fox mask. Naruko had her eyes closed as she felt the texture of the Anbu mask slip past her face, brushing across her nose, cheek, and jaw. She moved her hand away from her face while holding the mask in a comfortable grip and opened her eyes. They weren't cerulean blue anymore. They were red. And had 3 tomoe spinning within them. Naruko looked toward the darkening sky that began to crackle above her. Feeling a presence next to her, she tilted her head and saw a 15-year-old girl with brown hair tied in 2 pigtails, green eyes, and a small mouth. She was wearing a very large blue shirt and bulky pants. Naruko nodded toward the girl, who nodded back before vanishing in a puff of smoke. Naruko's red eyes slowly changed back to their original color, and her gaze grew distant as she reviewed the memories of her clone. Naruko watched as her clone infiltrated the Chunin camp as a slave, freeing all the other slaves before her arrival 15 minutes ago. She was grateful that her clone hadn't been attacked, or worse, since the operation would have been a failure and cost many innocent lives. Naruko looked up at the sky again as the rain began to pour heavily on her. It felt like the day she had been banished. Flashback. Naruko Uzumaki was on her way back from a mission in the Land of Sand. She had been tasked with a solo mission to destroy some Iwa ninjas who had begun to spread across Suna's borders and parts of the Land of Fire. The reason why Suna hadn't pushed back the Iwa forces was because of a possible new alliance between Iwa and Suna after the Konoha invasion. To avoid any threats, Konoha had sent Naruko to remove all the Iwa ninjas around the Fire and Wind country since it was easier for Suna to cross into Fire country. Walking through the large forest of the Fire country, Naruko was whistling a cheerful tune. Until she heard an explosion nearby. Boom! 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 Naruko snapped her head toward the sound and dashed toward it while putting her fox mask back on. Boom! 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 She felt the vibrations through the soles of her sandals. She could feel the wind and hear the voices of determination coming from the battle ahead. Naruko saw two statues appear, and she knew exactly what they were. After all, she had been trained by one of them. Jumping to the edge of the Valley of the End, she looked down to see Sasuke Uchiha, or what appeared to be him, stabbing Lee through the chest with a chidori. Naruko widened her eyes as she watched Sasuke brutally rip his arm from Lee's body. Naruko tensed and threw herself toward Sasuke and Lee. Slam! The ground cracked under Naruko's impact. She quickly looked to Lee and moved him to the feet of the statues. Naruko focused on Lee's chest, narrowing her eyes. She needed to stabilize him immediately. Sending chakra into her hands, Naruko placed her hands on Lee's torn chest, channeling her chakra to force the cells in Lee's body to regenerate and heal the damage. Sasuke muttered, "Dobi." Naruko ignored Sasuke as she continued to heal Lee, trying to stabilize his body. Sasuke, clearly annoyed, began to prepare another chidori, but Naruko didn't waver. Naruko dashed through the lush bushes and thick trees, following the sound of distant cries. She stopped on a branch and closed her eyes, focusing on the chakra around her. To her surprise, she detected two chakra signatures very close by. One had a familiar energy, similar to Sasuke's from the end of their battle, while the other felt weak and faint. Naruko checked her own chakra reserves, relieved to find she had recovered some. It wasn't the same as a regular kage, but it was roughly equal to Tsunade's chakra reserves. While Tsunade had near-perfect control over her chakra, Naruko knew she still had much to learn in this area. Focus, Naruko. You've got this. She reminded herself, determination burning in her eyes as she raced toward the two signatures. Dash. Clearing. A young woman with untamed pink hair and a tan tunic stood over Shikamaru, her black shorts and shinobi sandals grounded firmly in the dirt. Her skin had a brown hue, and her yellow eyes gleamed with intensity. Horns adorned her head, marking her as a powerful adversary. Shikamaru coughed as he stared up at her, feeling the heavy weight of his failure. The curse seal had granted her power beyond his ability to counter, and her strength in hand-to-hand combat had easily overpowered him. She had caught him in a genjutsu and taken his equipment, leaving him unable to formulate a strategy. He knew this was the end for him and couldn't help but wonder if his comrades had fared any better. Closing his eyes, he felt her presence above him. Chuya, the woman who had bested him, began to step on his chest, increasing the pressure with every movement. She seemed to relish in his defeat, a twisted smile crossing her face as she pushed further down. However, just as she prepared to deal the final blow, the world around her went dark. She collapsed next to Shikamaru with a thud, and Naruko stood in her place, having moved with the grace of a trained shinobi. That's the last of them, Naruko said, surveying the situation. My clones handled the rest of the sound shinobi. We'll take Miss Red here back to Konoha. Dash. Flashback ends. Now, Naruko was walking alone through the rain, the droplets soaking her blonde hair and shoulders as she made her way along the wet path. The steady rhythm of her sandals splashing in the mud was almost meditative, but it was the wind she felt most clearly. It was a soft, calming breeze that tugged gently at her hair, reminding her of simpler days. Naruko sighed, glancing down at her fox mask. The markings on its surface, accumulated over the course of her banishment, weighed heavily on her heart. She hadn't been able to find a repairman for it, and truth be told, there weren't many who could fix such a special piece. Closing her eyes, Naruko connected with the world around her, stretching her senses outward. She could feel everything within miles, trees, animals, the very land beneath her feet. Drawing in natural energy, she locked onto a specific location and vanished in a flash. Dash. Wide open clearing. With another flash, Naruko appeared in the middle of a spacious clearing. A smile tugged at her lips as she recalled memories of a secret home she had once cherished. She raised her hands, forming a prayer-like position, and began to gather chakra. Wood release, 4-pillar house technique. She announced. In moments, a tall, 2-story wooden house rose from the earth, its sturdy walls creating a secure barrier around the clearing. Naruko walked around the perimeter, skimming her fingers across the smooth surface. Ancient Fuinjutsu markings began to glow along the walls, forming intricate patterns that added an extra layer of protection. After completing her circuit, Naruko entered the house she had just created, walking past the markings that continued to appear around the walls. She paused at the front entrance, a small smile crossing her face as she looked at her new home. "Well, at least I can train here in peace now," Naruko said quietly before turning to enter the house for the night. "Well, that place was pretty disappointing," Naruko muttered as she stepped out of another gambling booth. It had become a habit to visit gambling dens when she was feeling particularly bored. However, with all the time she had spent training and occasionally indulging in some gambling, people started to refuse her entry. She had earned the nickname the Anti-Tsunade for her reputation. Honestly, they could have come up with something more fitting, like the Gambling Queen. It had been 2 months since Naruko had been banished, and she was now traveling the world, focusing on her training. For her, the banishment had brought peace, at least, until the shinobi from all corners of the world started tracking her down. Naruko reached into her Anbu pants pocket and pulled out the latest version of the bingo book. Despite reading it multiple times, she still couldn't believe what was written about her. Bingo book entry, 9212. Name, Naruko Uzumaki. Nicknames: Hero of the Wave, Savior of the Spring. Hair color, blonde. Eyes, blue. Family, unknown. Bloodlines, none. Clothing, Konoha Anbu attire with an Anbu fox mask. Personality, cheerful and dangerous, she can switch from friendly to an unstoppable foe in an instant. Ninjutsu, 913, mid jonin / Anbu taijutsu, 1013, high jonin / Anbu genjutsu, 013, no skill kenjutsu, 013, no skill ryojutsu, 013, no skill fuinjutsu, 1313, master spacetime ninjutsu, 013, no information-based stats. Strength, 913, mid jonin / Anbu, speed, 1013, high jonin / Anbu, intelligence, 813, low jonin / Anbu, elemental affinities, unknown. Extra abilities, superior healing and raven summons. Rank, chunin / Anbu. Bounty. Konoha. Alive, 80 million yen. Dead, 0 yen. Rank, A+, dangerous, but considered defeatable by a group of skilled chunin and jonin. Retreat if injured. The information had been sourced from Konoha. The people there had placed her at an A+ rank. She knew she was probably closer to an A rank, but the council had exaggerated her threat level to try and capture her by sending stronger ninja after her. Snapping the bingo book closed, Naruko sat down on a park bench she had spotted while walking through the area. She leaned back and let out a sigh. As she relaxed, she noticed an elderly man sitting with his grandson, enjoying a peaceful moment together. This sight brought back memories of her own banishment, and for a brief moment, her eyes became distant as she slipped into her thoughts. Flashback. "Come on, Shikamaru, wake up," Naruko said, having just finished healing Shikamaru's injuries. Now, she needed him to get up. When shaking him didn't work, Naruko decided to try something else. She formed a hand sign with her fingers and, with a playful grin, muttered, "Water release, rainfall." A large mass of water appeared above Shikamaru, rapidly expanding until it surrounded him. Soon, cold rain began to pour down on him, drenching him instantly. "Ah! Damn it, Naruko," Shikamaru shouted, leaping to his feet as the cold water continued to fall. Naruko smiled, her technique fading as the water was used up, leaving Shikamaru drenched and shivering. She shook her head, gesturing toward the gates of Konoha that were just ahead. Shikamaru nodded and started walking, but then paused, turning to Naruko with a serious look in his eyes. "Naruko, what happened to the rest of the Sasuke retrieval team?" Shikamaru asked, his gaze intense. Naruko simply waved her hand dismissively in front of his face before continuing forward. She glanced back with a smile and said, "They're fine." Shikamaru exhaled in relief, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. His first opportunity to lead a team had certainly been a challenging experience. Naruko observed as her clones appeared around her, each one carrying the injured shinobi. She was surprised to discover that the mission to retrieve Sasuke had been assigned to the rookies. Looking at each of her clones, which had multiplied from the original 3, Naruko received nods of confirmation from them, indicating that everyone was in a stable condition. Turning back to Shikamaru, Naruko offered a slight grin and a thumbs up. "All right, your team is stable. I need to report in, and you should take your team to the hospital," Naruko said. Shikamaru nodded, and with a flash of movement, Naruko disappeared in a burst of speed, heading straight for the Hokage Tower. After reporting her mission to Tsunade, she returned home to rest. Council room, 2 days later. When Naruko entered the council room, something felt off. Perhaps it was the fact that only one other person was present, or maybe it was the sensation of others hiding outside the room. The man in front of her was Danzo, one of the 4 elders of the village. It had once been a group of 3, but the old Hokage had recently retired, leaving Tsunade to assume the position. Naruko could tell Danzo wanted something, but she wasn't sure what yet. Danzo narrowed his single eye as he stepped closer to Naruko, gripping his cane loosely. If he succeeded, he would become the next Hokage, ensuring that the village would be protected according to his beliefs, different from those of Hiruzen and Tsunade. Naruko Uzumaki, Danzo said, his voice even as he slowly raised his hand toward his bandaged head. Naruko tilted her head, confused. Yes? She asked, wondering why Danzo was doing that. Danzo's expression remained unchanged as he muttered, "Obey." He swiftly removed his bandages, revealing the single Mangekyo Sharingan of Shisui Uchiha. Koto Amatsukami. Naruko watched as the red eye with a black, 4-point pinwheel spun rapidly. Mindscape. Naruko suddenly found herself in a dark, eerie sewer with red-painted walls. Sharingan Tomoe seemed to swirl across the walls. I will not fall to the Sharingan again. A voice echoed down the long corridor ahead of her. Determined to investigate, Naruko dashed forward with surprising speed. As she neared the source of the noise, an unsettling realization washed over her. Her mind started to recall memories that weren't hers, memories of being part of Konoha's Rudanbu division, of serving as Danzo's personal soldier. Naruko increased her pace, trying to make sense of the situation and needing answers. She strained her eyes and saw something she hadn't encountered before. Kyubi, the great beast, was engaged in a struggle. Naruko raced toward it, stopping just before the cage that held the fox, which immediately noticed her presence. Kyubi was a massive creature, about half the size of the Hokage monument. Its red-orange fur and fierce red eyes made it a fearsome sight. Yet, it also had the upper body structure of a human, complete with opposable thumbs on its clawed hands, and black markings surrounded its eyes, extending to the tips of its large ears. Brat! What have you done? You've nearly enslaved us to that cripple. You must send chakra into me so I can break this genjutsu. Once we're free, take that eye from him and run. Don't let him get it back, Kyubi roared. Naruko nodded, already feeling her memories slipping and blending with others that weren't hers. She jumped into the cage and placed her hand on the Kyubi's massive orange head, pouring her chakra into it. As she did, she could sense the genjutsu breaking, and the false memories began to fade. Council room. Danzo knew something was wrong. Naruko hadn't fallen to her knees to bow as expected. Moments after the technique was cast, she hadn't reacted in the way he anticipated. As he stepped closer to her motionless body, Danzo's eyes narrowed. But before he could reach her, Naruko's left arm shot up and yanked Shisui's Sharingan from his eye socket. Danzo staggered back in shock, though his face remained calm as he covered the now empty eye socket. Naruko held the eye in her left hand and swiftly jumped out of the window, leaving the council room just as the other members entered. They were met with 2 things, Danzo on the floor, bleeding, and Naruko fleeing the scene. Tsunade snapped out of her shock, realizing that Naruko was running. Assuming that Danzo had been attacked unjustly, she quickly concluded that Naruko had attempted to assassinate him but failed. Anbu, Tsunade shouted. 2 members of Anbu, Weasel and Nico, immediately dropped down from the ceiling. Yes, Hokage-sama, they replied, both having witnessed Naruko's actions. Tsunade sighed and gave her order. Tell all shinobi to stop Naruko Uzumaki. The fox Anbu, prevent her from leaving the village at all costs. The 2 Anbu nodded and rushed off. Village center. Naruko clutched her ribs, wincing in pain. Jumping from a multi-story building was not something anyone's body was designed to endure. While she had slowed her fall with wind chakra, it hadn't been enough to completely protect her. Suddenly, she felt her chakra reserves depleting faster than expected. Her clones were fading, and it seemed that more shinobi were closing in on her location. Looks like it's just good old sunshine from here on out, Naruko muttered as she struggled to get to her feet. However, something caught her attention. The Sharingan in her hand had disappeared. She had lost possibly the most valuable and dangerous item in the entire world. Naruko couldn't focus on that right now, she needed to escape. It was time to demonstrate to Konoha who the fastest user of the Sunshine technique was, just like the famous Shisui Uchiha of the Sunshine. Naruko got into a running stance before disappearing with multiple bursts of Sunshine. She had made it just in time as Konoha shinobi swarmed the area mere moments later. Tsunade, who had also appeared at the spot where Naruko had stood moments before, narrowed her eyes. She had heard from nearby shinobi that Naruko had fallen from the top of the Hokage Tower and had crashed through some merchant stalls. Merchants had also mentioned that Naruko had been clutching her side as if she had injured herself. That shouldn't have been possible. A fall from that height would have been lethal to anyone, even Tsunade herself, without the use of her rebirth seal. So if Naruko was as injured as it seemed, how had she managed to escape so quickly? Tsunade instantly understood what needed to be done next. Turning towards the Anbu operative known as Nico, she gave the final order regarding Naruko Uzumaki. Place Naruko Uzumaki, the Fox Anbu, in the bingo book. We need our Jinchuriki back. Poof. End of flashback. Naruko regained her composure and stood up. It had been over 2 hours since she had gotten lost in her memories. A subtle tingle on her left hip reminded her of what she had been waiting for. It seemed her clones had completed the task she had given them. She walked away from the lush, green park, passing by many civilians and homes built in the traditional Japanese architectural style. Turning left, she entered a narrow alleyway before vanishing without leaving a trace. Where is she? A voice shouted as the figure quickly scanned the area, turning their head rapidly left and right. The person in question was a rather unremarkable-looking individual. With shaggy black hair, brown eyes, a strong jawline, and a small nose, this individual stood at an impressive 6 feet 1 inch. Dressed in a standard Konoha Chunin outfit, they were clearly no stranger to the ninja world. This individual had crossed paths with the elusive Fox Ninja, known as the sole Fox Anbu operative in over 2 decades. Their squad had tried to capture the elusive ninja but failed miserably. The mission ended in disaster when their team was incapacitated, as they underestimated the Fox Ninja's skill. The ninja specialized in disabling attacks that could be healed over time, mostly. The only casualty from the Chunin squad was their Jonin leader, who had foolishly attempted to attack with fireballs without proper caution, nearly harming a civilian family in the process. After narrowly avoiding disaster, the Fox Ninja had incapacitated the Jonin, making sure to protect the civilians. Just as the Chunin was contemplating his next move, a kunai flew through the bushes, making a whistling sound as it headed straight toward him. Thud! A shadow dropped from the trees above. Emerging from the darkness, the figure revealed themselves to be a Konoha Anbu wearing a damaged fox mask with several deep slashes on it, clearly showing signs of battle. The Anbu reached up, adjusting the mask on their head with a swift movement, anchoring it with chakra. Naruko watched as the Chunin crumpled to the ground, the kunai now embedded in their forehead. She had expected the Chunin to be quicker, like their teammates, but it seemed their luck had run out. Moving towards the fallen Chunin, Naruko carefully pulled the kunai from their forehead and cleaned it before sealing it back into her pouch. Well, look at the little Shinigami, a graceful voice spoke from behind her, causing Naruko to narrow her eyes. Using her enhanced speed, she flashed behind the figure, prepared for a confrontation. Shino Megami, Naruko murmured as she attempted to strike the figure with a swift kick aimed at their side. But the figure was faster, evading her attack. Naruko quickly performed a backflip, avoiding another strike from the mysterious figure. This time, she aimed a sweeping kick at the figure's legs, tripping them, until, to her surprise, the figure began floating. Turning mid-air, the figure grinned, their crimson eyes glowing in the darkness. Naruko's own eyes flared with a matching intensity, causing the figure to pause in shock. How did you gain those eyes? The figure asked, now standing tall and gathering their spiritual energy. Naruko simply smirked. It's a secret, she said, before her form flickered and disappeared. The figure blinked, realizing that they had been caught in an illusion. Naruko had trapped them in a genjutsu, warping their perception of time and space. Inside the illusion, moments felt like hours, leaving the figure disoriented. The figure's energy flared as they realized the trick. That human tricked me, they muttered, furious. If my sisters find out. With a final glare, the figure vanished into a swirling black portal, leaving Naruko to finish her mission. Dash. As Naruko made her way back to her home, she reflected on the encounter. The genjutsu she had used was a technique she had perfected, thanks to the power of her Sharingan. With that ability, she could hold the illusion longer than ever before. It was a useful tool, especially when dealing with strong opponents. Approaching her home, Naruko noticed something unusual. The large gate surrounding her house was open, which could only mean one of three things: a member of the Senju clan, a member of the Uzumaki clan, or perhaps one of her own clones had forgotten to lock the door. Cautiously, Naruko summoned a kunai and entered, ready for whatever awaited her. As she moved through the house, she noticed a faint noise coming from her study room. Slipping through the shadows, she crawled up the wall and moved silently towards the room. When she reached the top of the stairs, she peeked into the study. To her surprise, a red-haired girl was sitting at the desk, studying one of Naruko's Fuinjutsu books. The girl seemed so focused on her notes that she didn't notice Naruko's approach. Naruko quietly crept behind the girl and placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking with an amused tone. "So, what are you reading?" The girl froze, eyes wide in shock. Slowly, she turned her head, letting out a startled scream. "I.e. What the heck, Databane?" the girl shouted, startled by Naruko's sudden appearance. The red-haired girl suddenly tried to break free from Naruko's firm grip. However, this only made Naruko grin widely. The girl stopped struggling when she heard something: laughter. Was Naruko laughing at her? The girl twisted her body and attempted to retaliate, delivering a chakra-enhanced knee. It was a move that could knock anyone off balance. Naruko was no ordinary person, though. She had endured countless challenges in her life and was still standing strong. But this move, it stung more than any injury she had ever faced. Naruko winced as she felt the discomfort fade, her body healing rapidly, making her stronger than before. It wasn't an experience she particularly enjoyed. She looked down at the girl, who was just a little shorter than her. Naruko gently moved her hand from the girl's shoulder and, without much effort, picked her up, walking down the stairs toward the kitchen. The redhead only smiled proudly, seeming unbothered as she was carried. Naruko placed the girl down and used a sealing technique to keep her still, then went to prepare some ramen for both of them. As she worked, Naruko decided to get to know this intriguing individual. "So, how did you get into my house?" Naruko asked, glancing over at the girl. The girl, sitting at the table, turned to face her. "Oh, it was easy. I just walked through the door, silly," she said with a grin. "So, are you clueless about how to enter a house or something?" Naruko raised an eyebrow, her face betraying no emotion, though internally, she couldn't help but smile at the girl's boldness. Then, the girl had one more thing to add. "So, the reason you didn't scream when I kicked you was because you don't have any, right?" she teased, her tone playful. Naruko froze for a moment, her eye twitching slightly. The silence that followed was palpable. "I do have them, you know," Naruko exclaimed, frustration building. "You just didn't hit me hard enough, got that?" She quickly slapped her hands over her mouth, realizing her old verbal tic had slipped out again. She groaned inwardly. Naruko had hoped she'd grown past that particular habit. The redhead, noticing Naruko's discomfort, chuckled softly as her long red hair covered most of her face. She then stood up and walked toward Naruko, who was now preparing the ramen. "Did you just make fun of me with that Databayo thing?" the girl teased, a playful glint in her eyes. Naruko sighed. "It's just a verbal tic from when I was younger. I thought I had gotten rid of it by now," she admitted, finishing preparing the ramen. Turning around, she found the girl standing there, beaming at her. The girl's eyes, a deep purple, sparkled with amusement. Her wide grin made her look like an excited child. The girl suddenly threw herself at Naruko in a tight hug, squealing in delight. "Yay! I'm not the only one," she cheered, holding Naruko as if she were a life-size plush toy. Naruko could feel herself being hugged tightly, though it wasn't painful, just unexpected. The girl's strength was surprising. But after a few moments, the girl released her and made her way to the table, eagerly waiting for the meal. "Are you going to hurry up, or are you going to make me wait forever?" the girl teased, her impatience evident as she tapped the table. Naruko placed the ramen in front of her and sat down to enjoy her own meal. But before she could take more than a few bites, the girl was already holding out her empty bowl with a hungry look on her face. "More," she exclaimed. Naruko chuckled softly. "You're just like I used to be, always hungry for more," she said, recalling the time she had spent at Ichiraku's ramen shop, devouring bowl after bowl. Naruko made a face and muttered under her breath. "I've got to be careful. It's like meeting a younger version of myself." She then turned to the girl. "Here you go," Naruko said, refilling the girl's bowl. As the girl began eating again, Naruko sat back and watched her. "You know, if you eat ramen more slowly, you might enjoy the flavor more," Naruko suggested, smiling as the girl glanced up at her. The girl paused for a moment, considering the advice. Then, With a delighted squeal, she dug into her meal at a more leisurely pace. Naruko stood up and went to a nearby cupboard, retrieving a bamboo cup and filling it with water from the atmosphere. She placed the cup beside the girl and leaned against the table, watching her eat. "So, what's your name?" Naruko asked, curious. The girl looked up from her ramen with a satisfied grin. "It's Kushina Uzumaki. What about you?" she asked, eager to know more. Naruko froze for a moment, surprised. "Uzumaki? Did you just say Uzumaki?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Kushina nodded proudly. Naruko's expression shifted, and before she knew it, she was lifting Kushina off the ground, swinging her around in excitement. "I'm not the last Uzumaki anymore," Naruko shouted joyfully, laughing at her own happiness. Kushina looked a little startled, but she couldn't help but smile at the enthusiasm. Naruko placed Kushina down and suddenly paused, realizing that she hadn't asked if Kushina even knew what being an Uzumaki meant. "Do you know what an Uzumaki is?" Naruko asked, her curiosity piqued. Kushina shook her head. "Not really," she admitted. Naruko pulled Kushina's chair back so she could sit and began telling her about the Uzumaki clan, how they were masters of both Kenjutsu and Fuinjutsu, how they had their own hidden village, Uzushio. As Naruko spoke, Kushina's eyes lit up with excitement, but that excitement quickly turned to a blush when she realized that she might be the last of their clan. During the entire story, Kushina seemed captivated by the history. The Uzumaki clan had been known for their expertise, and now, Kushina was beginning to see why her skills with Fuinjutsu were so natural. As the evening wore on, Naruko found herself thinking about where Kushina had come from. She decided to ask. "So, Kushina, which village are you from? I know you're a shinobi, given how skilled you are." Kushina's expression faltered for a moment as she looked down, unsure. I don't remember," she said quietly. "I woke up from a coma a few weeks ago, and all I know is my name and some basic shinobi skills." Naruko looked at her for a few moments, then made a decision. "Then why don't you stay here for a while? We'll figure things out together," Naruko said with a friendly smile. Moving her hand towards Kushina's shoulder, Naruko gently placed it on the yellow shinobi shirt she wore. "Well then. Looks like you'll have to stay with a distant relative," Naruko said with a smile, watching Kushina's expression shift from joy to confusion. "Which relative?" Kushina asked, looking at Naruko, who had been smiling but now sported a comical expression, complete with a large sweat drop and a bewildered look. Naruko raised an eyebrow and pointed at herself. She paused, waiting for Kushina to connect the dots. After a few moments, Naruko observed as Kushina's face transitioned through several emotions. "Why?" Kushina questioned, looking down, her long red hair partially covering her face and eyes. With a gentle smile, Naruko moved some of Kushina's hair from her face and tucked it behind her ear. "Because I can't let anyone in my family suffer. And who better to teach and learn Fuinjutsu with than another member of the clan?" Kushina suddenly lifted her head, revealing the tears she had been trying to conceal from Naruko. Naruko's heart softened, and she offered a warm smile, carefully wiping the tears from Kushina's cheeks. Turning around, Naruko began walking toward the stairs but paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder with a bright smile and her blue eyes sparkling. "Well, are you coming or not?" Naruko asked, her voice filled with encouragement as Kushina quickly jumped from her seat and dashed past her toward the study room. Naruko shook her head, smiling. It seemed that she wasn't the last Uzumaki anymore. Following Kushina's lead, Naruko walked calmly up the stairs and into the study. Greetings, my beloved YouTube family. That's all I have for this segment today. If you enjoyed the content, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for your support. Warm regards. 6 Path Weeb.